Hello and welcome to the podcast According to Sci-Faith, where we discuss topics revolving around the compatibility of science and faith. I'm Joshua Göcking and you're listening to According to Sci-Faith. Episode 34. Is scientific progress on the decline? In times of AI, this might sound like a silly question, but in the last years, this has been discussed very often, especially from scientists who are kind of on the fringes of science, but also from other scientists. And there is this debate whether science is declining or whether we still are making progress. And one of the arguments that is often brought forth, and this is especially in physics, this is brought forth, is that in fundamental research there has been no major breakthrough in the last since the 1980s. And before, it has been the case that roughly every 30 years or so since Newton, there has been a major breakthrough in fundamental science and fundamental research. So the question is whether this is the case, whether this is true. I mean, you can already see that it's hard to nail down how can we really see that there is scientific progress or whether there is decline and so on. And since there are these issues, recently there were studies to really try to quantitatively try to see whether this is true, whether science is in decline or whether the opposite is true, that as we are making more progress than ever before. And there's one paper where they try to find this out, one study where they try to find this out. And what they did is first of all, they realized the problem that their publications, the papers that being published and the amount of scientists have increased in the last years or decades. And from this, you cannot necessarily conclude that there is more progress. No, just because you have more of something does not necessarily mean that you have really also more good things of something. Just you have more because you have more authors does not necessarily mean that you have more good books that are written. So this is just a question between quantity and quality. So, and to measure this, they tried to, or they defined basically a measure of disruptiveness of a paper or a patent. And this is basically showing how much has this paper disrupted the field of research, or the patent disrupted the technology and so on. And they included this measure, and then they tried to basically study how this measure has increased or declined in the last years or in the last decades. And according to the study, this disruptiveness has declined with time. And there was another study who was putting some corrections to it because they missed something there, and they put some corrections on it. And what they found is that with these corrections, there is still a slight decline. However, there is also an increase in highly disruptive papers and patents. So they did not yield such a conclusive result, but they still had to conclude that there is still a decline occurring. So it seems that scientific progress seems to decline. And now, of course, is the question, why is this the case? What is the explanation for this? Are we doing something wrong? Is this just natural? And so there are three explanations, or maybe more, but three main explanations that were brought forth for this. The one is it's just no problem. It's just transitionary. It's just some time, and then it will start to pick up again. Just like, for example, in particle physics, there has been a time where they at particle colliders, they were always finding new particles, and then there was a period or an energy scale where they basically found no new particles, which they later called the energy spectrum, then they called the desert. And but after they passed this energy spectrum, when they went to higher energies, they again found new particles, and so this was just a region, an energy spectrum, a limited energy spectrum in which this was the case. However, there it didn't mean that there are no more particles occurring, and here if one considers this interpretation, it means that this does not mean that science is completely in decline, but it is just a transitionary period. Another explanation is to say that everything has been researched, everything has been found out. We are about to close the bucket of science, and we are about to have found out everything that is to be found out about nature, and therefore the science seems to be declining because we are just finishing up, and then it's over basically. And then there's also this explanation that that science has become basically a factory of publications, where scientific progress is not the goal anymore, but it's just all about publishing papers, about publishing in this magazine and so on, and getting cited, getting cited by other authors, and therefore increasing your value as a scientist. Since in many areas of science, when scientists are being hired, it's one of the measures universities seem to use to decide whether they should hire this person or not is how many papers they have published, and also how often these papers have been cited. So this has been kind of like a market of citations and so on going on, and many scientists criticize that this does not lead to real progress, but just to some kind of paper publishing factory where papers are published just because of papers being needed to be published, just to say that you were working on something, and not necessarily because you did any good work or because you achieved any results. Okay, time for a short break. And as I do it usually in these breaks, I want to give you some insight into my latest novel, Alien Thoughts. So let's listen in. Outside, a fresh breeze blew in her face. After all the time spent in perfectly air-conditioned offices, this air was welcome to her, and she decided to walk the way to her apartment. She left the campus, walked past the bridge, and enjoyed the view of the Heidelberg Castle for a moment. It was particularly accentuated by the rays of the setting sun. Above the castle, on the Königstuhl, the radio towers could clearly be seen. These were already there before the new order was established. Since then, they served for the thought control of large parts of the Rhine-Neckar region. Spellbound by today's particularly beautiful view of the castle, Patricia overlooked a pedestrian who was coming towards her and bumped into him. She was startled when she saw his furious face and was frightened for a moment. Immediately his expression changed, and with a friendly smile he apologized and asked if everything was all right. She answered in the affirmative and continued walking across the Neckarwiese, the meadow at the riverbank. For this man, the situation must have been such that after she bumped into him, he got angry and wanted to yell at her. He came to reason and decided to remain friendly. In fact, however, this was mind control by the AIs in action. In a fraction of a second, the AIs had recognized the emerging thought of anger, and by deliberately playing in deceptively real alien thoughts, they convinced the man to remain friendly. Only when one knew about these mechanisms, as Patricia did, it became noticeable in everyday interactions with people. So in this short excerpt, there is this mind control, which this book is about, shortly described. So if you found this interesting and want to learn more about how this works, how this whole world works, what's happening there, what's the story behind it is, and what will happen in the end, then I encourage you to get the book. You can order it on Amazon as an ebook, and I really would enjoy it if you would read it and also give me some feedback on it and write a review. This just helps other readers to get to know the book and get to see if this would also be something for them to read. Now, I want to mention my opinion to these explanations. I don't think that they all completely fit the nail. I think the first explanation that there is that is basically no problem, that we are just in a transitionary period. I think this is kind of to be answered with yes and no. There's some truth to it. It could clearly be that this is just some transitionary period, but I think that's not a complete reason. That's not the only reason, and I think there has to be other things behind it why this decline is observed. Then the second explanation, I think, is complete nonsense, that we have that everything is found out, that we are basically at the end of science, that we have found out everything. Many people have said this many times, and they were always wrong. So, for example, Max Planck, who was the founder of quantum theory, he was told to drop studying physics because there's no sense in it, because in several years all the problems of physics will be resolved. And how wrong were they? He created a whole new area of research, a whole new area of physics. So I think this is always wrong, because there is infinitely much knowledge, in my opinion. And therefore, we will, no matter how much we know, we will never know everything. So I think my physics teacher brought this point most clearly. He said, yeah, we know a lot of things right now, but what is a lot of knowledge compared to infinitely knowledge? So this is just the difference that we have there. So I think this will never be the case, and therefore this explanation is complete nonsense. The third point, I think I would also have to answer with yes and no, so that I observed this also. I was not affected by it because I only did a master's degree. I was not doing a PhD or postdoc or something like this. But in this, I met people who were doing this, and I saw their struggle with it, and saw this also happening, that there basically is this pressure to publish, this pressure to have this new publication, and that there is maybe some effect in hindering scientific progress there. But I think this is not a complete explanation, because you have to also consider that this is not new. Maybe in this extreme it is new, but it is not completely new. I mean, in Einstein's times, in Planck's times, there has to have been also similar processes going on. This is just how the world is. I mean, there was never a time where basically people, maybe there was, but I think not for a long time, where people were paying scientists just a bunch of money whether they've got results or not, and then they could basically freely do their science and find things out, because they were only focused on progress, or not on having their patrons who were paying for their research having to be accountable to them and present something to them to account for their work and for the investment that was made into them. I don't think there ever was such a time where this was completely true, and hence I do not believe that this is really the major problem that is responsible for this decline in science. And I think the reason, or one major reason, I think, is, as I described also in the last episode, that I think science is the most productive if it is based on this naturalistic theology, as it was with Newton, because I believe that science we had several times on this podcast that the creation is a reflection of the creator, and therefore if you get to know the creator, you also get to know creation, and you also get to see where the creator reveals himself in nature. And if you turn this around and try to describe nature, try to describe how nature works, then it is a really big help if you know how the one who designed nature, the one who reflects himself in nature, how he is, who he is. If you know him, then this works a lot better. And I also think historically, if you look at Newton and many of the first scientists who were devout Christians, I think there you see that historically this has also been true. And I think if we return to that and build science on a foundation of faith, where we not say, okay, we explain everything we do not understand away with God is doing it. No, but where we describe nature according to faith, and also use faith as an inspiration for our scientific endeavors, then I think we will get a lot more productive and will achieve a lot more progress. And I think the case that this has been declining, this methodology that was originally used in science has been declining over the years and decades and even centuries. I think this is one reason why we observe, in my opinion, even the major reason of why we observe this decline in scientific progress. And also what this gives you, what faith gives you, it gives you a purpose and a vision, what nature is for, what nature is created for. And I think this leaves no room for nonsensical theories to be pursued, because you can immediately see that they do not make any sense, although you might not see it from the nature, from the scientific facts and so on. And this makes you, of course, a lot more productive, because you can focus on theories who hold real merit. So I think there is really the breakthrough in science, or can be a new breakthrough in science, if we go back to this foundation of faith where the scientific method was built on. So that's everything for today's episode. I hope you liked it and you enjoyed each part of it. If you want to get in touch with me or discuss a topic or want to give me some feedback, then feel free to contact me using the contact form on my website, sci-faith.de/en. And there you can go to the contact tab and contact me. And if you have any other things or episodes you want to have covered there, or topics you want to have covered, feel free to contact me there. Also, if you are not yet familiar with the format in which this podcast is produced, let me just briefly explain it to you. So there is always at the beginning of a month or of a block, there is a big block of 4 episodes in one thing. It's kind of like a preview, which I call it, where you have the next 4 episodes all in one episode together, combined. And this is for people who like to hear long format podcasts, who have a long way to work or something else, where they can listen to a long episode and can then have a preview of the next 4 episodes all at once, and are completely up to date from the beginning of the block. For those who like their episodes shorter, who prefer it if they have a half an hour or even less of a podcast episode, for those there is every week afterwards will appear a podcast episode almost in that length, and this way I can publish every week a new podcast every episode, and everyone can have it his own way, either once a month a long chunk of content, or once a week a shorter format podcast episode. So I think that's the best way for everyone, and also for me when I'm producing it. Please also note that this is an independent podcast, which means that it is recorded, produced, and marketed by me. So I really need your support in this. So if you like this podcast, then give it a 5-star rating. And if you have the time, even write a review to it. This just helps other listeners to become aware of this podcast, and then people who might be interested in this content can become aware of it. Also, if you have friends who you think would like this content, then recommend it to them and share it with them. Also, you can support me in other ways, for example, by reading my blog and subscribing to my newsletter, or even by reading my books, which you can find on Amazon. For example, there is my latest novel out now is Alien Thoughts, which is pretty entertaining from the feedback that I gotten, and so it's also in some way related to science and faith. The topic of it is also in there, but of course you can also read the book to this podcast, Sci-Faith, The Compatibility of Science and Faith, which is also available in English since last year. Thank you for that, and now I wish you a wonderful day, and I'm looking forward for you to tune in again next time.